Hi, I'm Jessica Russo-Scher, and I do a lot of gel plate printmaking, and I have some tips and tricks and techniques to share with you. Doing transfers on a gel plate is so much fun, but it can be very frustrating. So if you like the idea of doing transfers, but maybe you don't have access to a laser printer or you don't want to do magazines, charcoal transfers could be the next best thing for you. If you're looking for ways to elevate your paintings or bring another dimension to your printmaking, this is a fantastic way, especially if you like drawing. So let me show you how it works. In this video, I'm going to start off by teaching you some of the basics of how it works, and then start working bigger and a little bit more complicated, and then move on to this very painterly charcoal image transfer with the gel plate. Let's start off with the basics. If you're using vine charcoal and you do a drawing on just regular paper, it helps if the paper is smooth. And just a simple drawing, what will happen is that the charcoal is leaving a little bit of dust on the paper. And that paper holds that dust temporarily, and then you bring your gel plate. Mine is a BlueLavaArt plate, and I push down on it, press down. You don't have to press terribly hard, but even pressure throughout. And what happens is all that dust loosens up off of the paper and transfers onto the gel plate. But then what do you do with the plate? Now it's temporarily there, but if you add some paint on top of that charcoal, it will lift off and attach to another sheet of paper. Let me show you. I'm using a brayer and just rolling out acrylic paint, and I'm just rolling a thin layer. The charcoal does not smudge underneath. And the next thing you do is get another piece of paper to put on top. After it dries, this is dried for about 5-10 minutes, I lift it up and you can see it's on there. It also does not smudge at all. Any of that gray stuff that you see on the pink is also because my plate was filthy. You can see a little bit of residue on the plate, but that's okay. I'll talk about cleaning that later. Here's another version of that I did as an example with my printmaking class in person. I did a small drawing of a landscape very quickly with vine charcoal, pressed it onto the plate, and it transferred over. Now, if I just use a little bit of paint, roll it on, it does not smudge the drawing underneath. And while that paint layer is wet, I'm going to take another piece of paper, something strong enough, around 200 grams is great. It can be a slightly thinner, but it works really well when you're working with multiple layers if you use something at least 200 grams. Press it down and then let it dry. The drying time depends on the humidity in your area. It could be very quick. It could be very long. It depends on how thick you put the paint on. But you could always start peeling it and see if it's transferred. This one transferred fairly well. My plate was, again, very filthy, so I have this gray tone on it. But you can get an idea of how this works and think about the potential of what you can do with this process. Now, these are with simple drawings and very quick transfers. Now let's try the same process, just a little bit more detailed. I am going to be working larger on my 18 by 24 inch gel plate by BlueLavaArt, but you could do the same thing on a smaller plate as well. So here is a quick tree drawing, a little bit of a landscape, and I am going to show you how it transfers onto the gel plate. Apply pressure. Even pressure, I'm just using my hand, but you could use a Baron. And then lift it up, and you can see that it all transfers over onto the gel plate quite easily. Now the next step is to paint over it, and that charcoal is not going to smudge anywhere. It really does not move. So you are perfectly fine with whatever you want to do with it. It has a variety of values, degrees of light and dark. So I'm going to use a little bit of this leftover paint from one of my students who just squirted out way too much paint. So it's a little bit of blue and white, and there's some green somewhere on that palette. And I'm going to roll it out over the charcoal, just over that whole area. I'm not necessarily covering the whole plate, just trying to create one even background that will also serve as the pickup layer that will allow it to lift up off of the plate. I continue to go back to the palette, grab more paint, roll it out, and just kind of approach a sort of painterly way of picking this charcoal up off of the plate, just using a barren with one layer of paint behind it. Now I'm going to lay 200-gram Bristol board on top of it, and I will let this dry under books after I press it down really well. And this will ensure that the paint adheres to the Bristol and it adheres to the charcoal and will eventually release from the gel plate once it's all dry. Okay, it has been about 45 minutes, so I think it's fully dry. I'm going to flip it over this way. And let's see. Okay, so I can see the mottled texture of my leftover paint in there, and that's fine. I wanted that little bit of randomness without doing any reverse painting, really. Just the pickup layer. And you can see the charcoal like stays on really well. Now you don't have to do this on such a big plate, but it's fun to work on the big plate. Now, will it work with reverse painting? Let's level this up and see what the possibilities are. And that's what I'm going to do. I am going to do a more elaborate drawing. Building still on that same idea of a landscape, I'm going to do a tree. Now, if you are new at drawing trees or landscapes, I have a whole video linked up there and in the caption below on how to draw trees. I am basically creating a very detailed but loose and expressive drawing with vine charcoal. I'm only using vine charcoal, erasers, a cloth, a chamois cloth for blending. For this, I want to create not just the dark lines, but I want a lot of midtones. I want to create variations in shading in my drawing to see how well they would transfer. Now, I'm going to be transferring this on a very large plate. That's why I'm doing a very large drawing. You don't have to do it on a large plate, obviously. You can do this on whatever size plate you want. But I have the bigger plate, so I'm using it. I'm using both my fingers and the chamois cloth to continue to build in the shading and using the vine charcoal to continue to find the structure of the branches. When I teach my students this, I talk about the ABCs of drawing trees. There's 2 C's. A for asymmetry. Trees should be somewhat asymmetrical. Bifurcation. The branches need to fork off and get smaller as they fork out. Fork out, that sounds weird. The first C is caffeination, which I tell them is that's a Miss Russo word. Caffeination is more that you want to have jagged lines, like you had too much caffeine, because a lot of times when they're first starting out, their lines are too smooth, too soft, too, rounded. So I want them to be a little bit more jittery, have a little bit more randomness. And the last C is chiaroscuro, and that's the shading. So knowing where your light source is and where to pull that in your drawing. So for me, my light source is coming from the left-hand side and the right side is a little bit darker. Now that my drawing's done, I'm going to shake it off a little bit and make sure some of the excess charcoal is off of it. And I will lay it on my really big plate. My plate has a little bit of tone at the top of it from a previous print, but that's not going to interfere with what I'm doing. I also have some blue paint stuck on it from a print I pulled this morning. And I'm going to leave that because it might suit the whole vibe of this work to have that kind of contrast with it. I take my paper. Now, this paper is smooth drawing paper. It's pretty thick, thick enough. It's not like newsprint, but you can do this on newsprint. And then I'm pressing down. I'm using my hand. You can use a baren to give pressure all over. And I'm not pressing very hard. I just want to make sure that I'm pressing throughout the paper and it's even. I can lift it up and give a tiny little sneak peek and see how it's going, and then decide if I want to press down a little bit more. And as I press down and lift up, I can see how the image transfers onto the paper, and I'm getting a lot of those midtones. But if at any moment I second guess myself, I can lay right back down and press down on the rest of it. And it looks pretty good. It looks like I have a lot of the details, especially of those branches, but there's so many small little details of those branches. I want to give a little extra love to that area, make sure every last bit of them is transferring as best as possible. But it really does transfer super easily. Upon immediate contact, the gel plate just really kind of absorbs the charcoal, not absorbs it, but it clings to it. It wants it. It's very happy to have it on the plate. So this is very exciting, the way that it attaches. Now that it's fully transferred, I'm going to go in with a little bit of mineral oil on a cotton swab and do some subtractive methods. Remove some of the charcoal, lift it up off of the plate, and try to create some highlights and some more definition in some areas. I need to let that mineral oil dry a tiny bit. I can then start reverse painting. Now, this is where the fun is. I'm using a limited color palette to try to bring everything to be very cohesive. It's a wild drawing, so I want it to be a lot more cohesive. I'm blocking in colors, building them in on the tree branches, and seeing how they work together. Now, when you do reverse painting, the first thing that you put down will be the top layer of your print. So I have to be very cognizant of the first colors I put down and then build on top of that. I am using primarily Amsterdam acrylic paint for this. I am applying my paint by mixing it on a palette on the side, but also mixing it very generously on the plate itself. The gel plate allows for you to be able to mix the paint. It stays wet for a reasonable amount of time, and so you can really build in those layers together. Now, if you haven't done any work on the gel plate, building up layers and painting with reverse painting before, you might want to try doing more of a simple lift like the ones that I demonstrated earlier. Just applying color and putting down the paper and lifting it to try it out. Then when you start feeling a little bit more confident with it, you can start building in reverse painting like this. If you have never painted before, learning how to use the paint off of the gel plate might be a good suggestion first, because it just gives you a better idea of how the paint handles, how to use the brush in different ways. In building in my paint strokes in a very, in a way that I'm just manipulating the brush. So I switched to a round brush here, but I'm still trying to use my strokes to be very expressive, blending in my colors, mixing them, trying to create my own colors rather than using the ones that the factory decided I should use. Even though I love my Amsterdam colors, I want to create ones that have more depth and dimension. And sometimes that happens through mixing your own colors. I'm going to speed through this part and let you watch as I go, because it is basically me taking the time that's needed to paint. And in social media, we don't always see all of that because we have to speed it up. You're not going to sit here and watch me paint for several hours. And if you would, let me know. I'll start recording some real life paint time things. It will be hours and hours and hours. And you probably have a podcast or two playing in the background with no voiceover. Overall, I'm done with the branches and I want to start blocking in some of the sky. When you do reverse painting, you're thinking in reverse. So I need to think about what's behind the tree, and that would be the sky. I want the lighter parts of the sky blocked in first, and I am mixing in a slightly more neutralized blue. So I'm using a variety of blues with a little bit of warm tones in it because I feel like it's going to really relate to the colors that I used in the tree. I want to pull out those small, subtle, warm variations. I mixed in some quinacridone magenta in there with the tree, and I want those little bits to really sort of pop out in the final one. And then I go in with slightly more blue sky and start building that in. At this point, I want to go in and block in a few more of those tree branches a little bit more. Acrylic paint is slightly transparent and even more so recognizable when you do it on a gel plate because there's going to be gaps in between your brush strokes that you don't always see. And there's the paint always has like a little bit of space in between it. So by adding a little bit more opaque paint behind it, it will make things like the trunk of the tree stand out a little bit more. I already know that I want to do a pickup layer that's going to be similar to the sky color. So any place that I don't want a more blue sky, I'm going to leave empty. And I'm adding some of the blue and some of the white directly off my palette. Now, most of these layers have dried fully. There might be a little bit still wet because I'm painting this in such an impasto way that some of them are probably still a tiny bit wet, but it's not going to smudge that much. I'm going to take my brayer and start rolling out my pickup layer. So, what is happening here? The science behind this is that the gel plate is made up with this polymer that has mineral oil and stuff in it, and it forms a temporary bond with the charcoal and with the dried acrylic paint. When I put wet acrylic paint on top of it and then paper on top of the wet acrylic paint, the wet acrylic paint and all the subsequent dry layers attach to the paper. In this case, I'm using 200-gram Bristol, and this is my 18 by 24 inch Deli Arts plate. So this is a big piece of paper. I place the paper as centered as I can, which is, if you've watched any of my videos, you know it's probably not perfectly centered. And I press down. And this is the most critical part of the entire process. That's why you see my head in the frame, because I am putting in a lot of elbow grease here. I am pressing hard. I am making sure that there's pressure and attachment on every single square centimeter of this paper. I want to make sure that it is in full contact. The paper is in full contact with every last bit of that wet paint, and the wet paint is smushed down and in contact with every last bit of all of the paint that's underneath. And that is the only way I'm going to make sure that this will lift very well. Even with that said, and even with all this pushing, it is not guaranteed that it's all going to lift off. But I'm fairly confident that I will. I'm using my hands in a variety of different ways to really like steamroller this in. You could use a clean you could use a clean Baron or a brayer to do this. But you can see how much the paper is forming to all of those impasto brushstrokes. I found this scrap piece of cardboard nearby, and I am stacking books on top of the cardboard to add extra weight as it dries. I am going to let this sit for probably 48 hours. When I'm recording this, it is a Friday afternoon, and I won't be back until Sunday or Monday. So I'm just trying to stack books on it as much as possible and let that sit to dry. The more weight on it, the better. I'm grabbing whatever I have nearby and just piling it on. Also, just, why not? Just, it couldn't hurt, right? And now I'll go clean up my brayer and all of my supplies. This is now Sunday. I'm taking the books off and taking the cardboard off. I'm going to feel the paper first to see if it feels damp at all. If it feels damp at all, then I'll let it sit for a little while before I take up the paper. If it's not damp, if it's dry, then I can go ahead and go right to it. So this is the first time I get a full look at what it looks like underneath. I was too nervous to lift it up fully before. I did give a tiny sneak peek, but I can flip it over and see it's ready to be pulled off. So when I'm working with my big plate, especially, I like to roll the plate off of the paper because it gets a very strong grip onto the paper, and you don't want to damage your paper or have your paper rip. So by pulling the plate off of it, loosening it, especially around the edges tend to get a little extra sticky in there. You just want to loosen those crusty bits up on the edge and start rolling your plate off. And this is when the most exciting part happens. It's just that dopamine hit when you know that it's coming off of the plate. As I'm doing this, I can see there's tiny little speckles on my plate of white paint, and that's because I've painted with such large impasto marks on the paper. But I'm really happy with how well this is coming off of the paper. I can see that there's charcoal on the plate, and that is completely normal. I will talk about how to clean that up and everything in a little bit. But first, let me just muscle this thing off of my paper. If your print is sticking at any time, lay the plate back down and let it dry further. If it's not sticking, then go for it. So you can see this ghost image on my plate. That's okay. We will clean that up later. But right now, let's just take a good look at the print. So I can see a few wrinkles, which is okay. I think if I used a 250 gram Bristol, it would have been better. But I have good variation of shape. I can see those little bits of blue paint that was on the plate before I did the image transfer, and I like the way they blend into everything. Now I'm going to take care of my baby. I put some baby oil, some mineral oil on the plate, and I'm just going to massage it in, and that charcoal will lift. I could use a baby wipe along with the mineral oil to kind of work it in. And it's fine as long as you're being gentle with the plate and not scrubbing it with like a scrub brush, you'll be fine. Just adding a little bit more oil. This will also condition it after leaving paper on it for a couple of days. It's a good idea to have a little extra mineral oil in there and just give it a good wash like this. You could use some soapy water afterwards to rinse it off a little bit. I'll probably just lay some plain paper on top of it to soak up some of the extra mineral oil. And I'll just be aware that maybe the next couple prints I do might have a little bit of this charcoal residue, just like you saw in the beginning of this video when I did my examples. They had some charcoal residue because I had been working on a few different prints. The plate is not ruined. It is a very workable plate. In fact, like I said, I had that black tone from a print that I did. That doesn't affect my other prints. It's fine. It fades away over time. Let's take a look again at the final photos of the work, the impasto, along with the little bits of charcoal texture on the print and the leftover little bits of crusty paint from the previous print really just add to the texture. And you can see how the brushstrokes build through this piece. I really encourage you to try charcoal on the plate and see how you can play around with it, especially if you've done some gel printing before or you're getting frustrated with image transfers with laser prints. This could be a really fun way for you to use your gel plate. Well, I hope that helps you understand this process a little bit better and you have a little bit more of an idea of how you can incorporate this into your own art making practice. So if you're interested in learning more about charcoal transfers, the gel plate printmaking process, check out some of my other videos. I'm also running an online course, and there's more information in the description below. And I'll continue to share videos with you and answer your questions about art making in general, and especially things related to the gel plate.